London, the city of endless wealth, opulent mansions, expensive cars, cocktail parties, and dinners at exclusive restaurants where the only thing that matters is whether the wine is aged enough to justify its price tag. This is where our protagonist, a young British aristocrat, was born, a boy who, at first glance, seemed to have it all. Money by the truckload. A family name so old and illustrious that it was practically written in gold. But oh, here comes the catch. James, let's call him for simplicity, had no talent, no ambition, and absolutely no reason to do anything at all except enjoy the pleasures of life. He didn't need to work. Why bother? He had a trust fund large enough to drown in, and a father who was more interested in passing on his brand new yacht than in passing down any real knowledge or wisdom. School? Waste of time. Why go through the trouble when you can hire someone to handle your affairs and spend your days lounging in silk robes while the world runs itself?
Every single day for James was like a sequence from a high-budget reality show. Wild parties, the best clubs, fancy hotels, and an ever-changing roster of beautiful faces, all of whom swam in his pool of wealth. From the moment he woke up in the penthouse suite to the time he passed out on the back of some limo after another night out, everything was just perfect, or so it seemed. You see, James was so deep in his bubble that he failed to realize the cracks were starting to show. Money, which had always been his shield, could no longer protect him from the world. The illegal deals his family was involved in, the money laundering, the shady connections with underground businessmen, well, that was all fine as long as no one found out. But one fateful night, those very cracks gave way to disaster. A scandal broke out, a big one, and it wasn't some petty little matter either. No, this was the kind of mess that would have toppled the British monarchy itself if they were involved. But since James wasn't royalty, just a spoiled rich kid, it wasn't the crown on the line, but his freedom. The police, rather displeased with his family's dealings, started sniffing around. And for the first time in his life, James realized that the one thing his money couldn't buy was time. Time to avoid the inevitable consequences of his foolish decisions. So what does a man like James do when he's cornered? He flees, of course. But he's not going to hide in some back alley of London. No, that would be too obvious. So, in the spirit of his endless indulgence, he boards a plane to Asia. Why Asia, you ask? Because, as any seasoned criminal knows, when you're a privileged British aristocrat on the run, the best place to hide is in a place so foreign, so vast, that no one can trace you. And so, off to Bangkok he went, as if Asia were the ultimate sanctuary from all his troubles. The bustling streets, the neon lights, the nightclubs where anything goes, it was all perfect. Here, in this labyrinth of chaos, James could escape not only the police, but also the reality of what he had become. The first few weeks were perfect. The finest casinos, the wildest parties, and a new crop of glamorous women who were more than willing to show him the time of his life. But soon, James found that his money could only buy so much excitement before it started to lose its flavor. At first, the endless nights and lavish clubs were a relief from the stress of his old life, but then something started to eat away at him. Boredom. Yes, boredom. He had everything: the private jets, the exclusive yachts, the world's finest food and drink, and yet it all felt empty. The glitz and glamour of Bangkok didn't fill the void in his soul. It felt shallow. Everything around him, every moment, every new connection felt so incredibly meaningless. Was this it? Was this all there was?
The more time passed, the more he started to realize that this life was just another distraction. It didn't matter how many expensive bottles of whiskey he consumed or how many women fawned over him at the bar. nothing filled the gap that was widening inside him. The thrill of the chase was gone. Money was still great, of course, but what was the point of hoarding all this wealth if it couldn't bring him true satisfaction? But here's where the story takes a turn. A slight, almost imperceptible one. After a particularly wild night, when he had reached a sort of emotional rock bottom, he found himself wandering the streets of Bangkok, lost in thought. He wandered aimlessly for hours, finally ending up at the edge of the city, in the rural outskirts where the lights were dim and the noise of the metropolis faded into the soft chirping of crickets and the distant rumble of the occasional motorbike. And that's when he saw it. A small, dusty village. It looked almost like a mirage, like something from a dream. Tucked away between sprawling rice fields and the towering, mist-covered mountains in the distance, it was a place that seemed untouched by time. The moment he arrived, he felt something stir within him. It wasn't the rush of finding another exclusive restaurant, nor was it the adrenaline from a night of partying. It was something deeper, something real, something he hadn't felt in years.
In the village, people were simple. They didn't care about his past or his wealth, nor did they treat him differently. They worked the land, raised livestock, and lived in small, humble houses with thatched roofs. Their lives were a far cry from the artificial world he had been living in. Here, in the middle of nowhere, James felt a strange peace. But that peace was nothing compared to what would happen next. One day, while exploring the village, he stumbled upon a small goat, just a regular, scruffy little animal that seemed to have no particular significance. But to James, it was like finding a part of himself he had lost. The goat followed him around the village with its big, curious eyes and quiet presence. It was different from the people in the clubs he had known. It wasn't impressed by his money. It didn't care about his family name. It didn't need him to buy it things or entertain it with his endless stories of parties. It just was. And for the first time in a long time, James realized what it meant to be content. At first, it was just a strange connection, a man from the world of excess and a humble goat. But over time, the bond between James and the goat grew. It became a symbol for everything James had lost and was now finding again. As he spent more time in the village, helping the farmers with their work, learning to live with the land, he started to feel more alive than he had ever felt in his gilded cage back in London. He wasn't just hiding from the police anymore. He was hiding from himself. And in this little village, surrounded by nature and the simplicity of life, he began to confront the man he had become. He wasn't just a rich, empty shell anymore. He was a man who had finally begun to understand what it meant to truly live. The goat, small and humble as it was, became his symbol of redemption. It was the first thing in his life that hadn't wanted anything from him. It hadn't cared about his money or his title. It had just followed him around, quietly, without judgment. And James started to wonder, could his life become like that too? Could he live a life that wasn't defined by his wealth, by his past, by his family's sins? He worked hard alongside the villagers, who accepted him without question. There were no grand gestures, no awards, no applause, but that in itself was the greatest reward he could have asked for. He no longer needed the distractions. He no longer needed to flee from his past, because here he had found a new version of himself, a version that didn't need money to be happy, a version that didn't need constant validation or luxury. As the months passed, the goat grew older, and James began to understand the true meaning of freedom.
It wasn't about running away to another continent, hiding behind a new identity. It was about facing your past, owning up to your mistakes, and realizing that true happiness doesn't come from things or status. It comes from the simplicity of life, from being honest with yourself, and from finding peace where you least expect it.
But of course, this is where the story could end, with James finally finding redemption in a small village and living out the rest of his days as a humble farmer, living peacefully with his goat. Or perhaps one day he might return to London, rich once again, but this time with a different perspective on life. The choice, as always, would be his. But one thing was clear. For the first time, James had learned what it meant to be truly free. And it had nothing to do with money, fame, or power. It had everything to do with finding the simplicity of goatness.